person that we are, final day at work and the first day coming into retirement, we tend to have the same spending patterns. And so it could be a pretty big adjustment once we hit stop on that paycheck. And now we're living off of whatever we've saved and accumulated.
Hey, Nick.
Scott, what's going on?
Just ready for another episode of Real Personal Finance.
Let's do it. Been looking forward to it all week.
One of the things that I think about, and I think, clients run into this issue too. Sometimes when we people come work with us, they think we're gonna help them solve this like binary choice. It's gonna be this big choice that they have to come to, and they have to make this immediate decision. And I often find that life is not the yes, no of like, do I move from San Diego to Chicago? There's so much we can do in between. The main thing we can do if we're unsure about what to do is to test it.
Yeah.
And so I thought we could just riff on that a little bit today.
Ooh, I like that. Yeah. I think there's a lot of life to be had in the gray, right? And I think that is the meat of financial planning is like, let's figure out what this looks like. Because we could live a perfect life on paper, right? But to actually then go and try it out, we don't know if we're going to like it. So yeah, I think we should unpack that today.
Often what we think is going to be grand, there is that saying, the grass is greener on the other side of the fence. Or sorry, the grass always seems greener on the other side of the fence.
Yeah.
Often once we get there and we experience it, it doesn't end up being all that we hoped it would be. Perhaps there's some pleasant surprises, but oftentimes there's some surprises that aren't so pleasant as well. So rather than just diving into, this is the life I'm going to do, I found that for clients, it's so helpful to find little ways to go test things and see, like, is this really what I want?
I'm glad you said little ways. Yeah. My mind was going to baby steps where it's like, it's so hard to make a 180-degree pivot, become a different person overnight. So what are little ways that we can start to have that actionable progress and say, okay, well, if this is where we want to be in, 2 years from now, call it retirement or call it buying a house. We'll get into a couple examples today, but what's the next step? That's all we have to worry about. And so how do we break that down?
So, yeah, I mean, I think examples are probably a helpful thing here. One that we've commonly seen in the past, most of our clients now, we focus on executives with stock comp and their parents, quite honestly, retirees are really who we see often. But even still, I'll do these financial checkups where we have a 2-hour session with a family who just has really lots of great questions and to get help. And oftentimes one of those questions will be like, hey, we're in Southern California, so maybe they really want to own a home in the future. And it's, hey, should I rent or should I buy? And often the question really comes down to, how do they feel about home ownership in the long run? One, how long do they want to own it? 5 years or more is ideal, all these things. But then so much of it's just looking at, how are you guys going to feel cash flow wise when you make that purchase?
And there's a lot of emotions that go into that, right? There's, whether it's like, oh, this really feels like that badge of adulthood that we own the house. We can get swept up into that euphoria where we can become blindsided or blindsided towards, well, what about all the hidden expenses? And so this idea of, we don't have the house yet. We can go into this dress rehearsal of, what does it look like to own the house on paper, right? Let's try out what it would be like going from, some sort of whatever we're paying in rent today, which presumably is going to be much lower than a mortgage, right? And let's cash flow this out. Do we actually have, the monthly income coming in to make this happen? Or are things going to feel really tight, right? And, oftentimes it's actually really nice to be able to do that before we have any remorse after, the ink is dry and we bought the house.
Yeah, absolutely. So to your point, that's exactly what I'll recommend. So it's just a matter of, okay, like how much are you paying in rent now? Oh, like $3,000 a month right now for rent. Awesome. And then it's like, well, have you figured out roughly how much would that first home be that you want to get into? And I just briefly looked one up here that there was a small 1,100 square foot condo around town for like $750,000, right? And so it's like, hey, if that's their paradise, awesome. And maybe that's similar to what they're renting in now, or even more so if you want, you can even, if you're like really comfortable with the size of home you have now, just go, if you're renting in a home, go on Zillow and see what's my house worth, figure out what it would cost to live there. What's 20% down? How much would your mortgage be? So that's what we'll do with clients. And like, if we look at that little example that I just thought of, okay, $750,000, 20% down will be 150,000 if we have it for the down payment. So then we'll have a mortgage of around, at 7%, will be around 39. I'm just going to round up and call it $4,000 a month. Yep. You're going to pay property taxes of about, I'm going to round, it's around $690 a month. I'm going to guess homeowners insurance is around $200 a month. And then you need to factor in maintenance, because I guarantee it's an older home. Yeah. So put in another like up to $7,500 a year. Yeah. So something like $5,000 to $5,500 a month. So the goal would be, hey guys, like just go take an extra $2,000 to $2,500 a month from your cash flow and go save it every month and don't spend it. Now you'll be saving for the down payment, which is lovely, but you'll be living into what does it feel like cash flow wise to buy a home before you do it.
It's sure nice to be able to do that too, just to be able to see like, can we actually do this, right? Because it's one thing to think about it, but then when that money is allocated and done and gone, right? You mentioned earlier, it's a nice way to trick ourselves into forced savings, because while we're doing that, we're forcing ourselves as a saving mechanism to actually save more towards the house. So that's great. Yeah. But it is an interesting observation just to see during that time, that test panel, what actually comes up. Could we do it? Right. And I always like to say, like, let's try this out for a couple months, right? We can get lucky for a month, find different ways to cut it. But like, all right, what does this look like 2, 3, 4 months in? How is that going? Right. Are we game ready?
100%. Because that's like it's such a huge change for people when they go to buy a house, especially with interest rates where they are and the costs of houses where they are. It's usually a big jump to go from renting to owning. And to your point, that was kind of the American dream, was that you have to own a home. If you don't, owning a home is a part of the American dream to be fulfilled. That's the old American dream, right? I don't know that it necessarily makes sense in a lot of cities right now. But I think it's still important for clients to figure out how do they want to do it, and can they afford it, and how does it feel for them? Because one thing you don't want to have happen is that you move into a house and you feel so poor, because you are house poor. You can afford your house, but you can't go anywhere or do anything. And for most people, that's not the life they want to live.
Right. And what's interesting too is I work with a lot of pre-retirees. So, as you mentioned, like, tech and, high net worth engineers or business owners and their parents and so on and so forth. I work with a lot of clients that are in their late 50s, early 60s, and they're now getting to this point where they want to retire, right? Yeah. They're starting to go on more vacations. They're maybe starting to chase grandbabies around the country and figure out, well, should we move back east and follow the grandkids or get that second house? And we have a lot of conversations that look and sound similar to what we're just talking about here and now, but they're scripted a little differently.
Yeah, now it's a different test.
What's that?
It's a different test.
It is a different test. What does it look like to hit the pause or actually the full stop button on our career? Or even, as we'll get into a little later, or even now, is maybe even selling our house and moving out of state. And so how does a test drive apply to those different situations and scenarios?
Yes. I've had clients say that they want to, when they're done, when their oldest is off to college, they are out of the state they're in and they're somewhere else. And for some of them, they know exactly where that is, and because it's maybe family related or maybe where they grew up or something like that. And they kind of have the plan in place. And yet for others, it's kind of, there's an idea of where they want to go, but it needs to be tested. And so then it's a lovely test is just to utilize Airbnbs or, short-term rentals for a few months, and go put yourself in a neighborhood and be like, do I love being here? Or where is my favorite neighborhood in this city? Right? Like, if you want to be in a specific place, so go figure it out before you rush in and buy something.
Right. Yeah. That's one of my favorite things to actually let's get really creative. Let's try this out. Let's figure out, I think we were talking earlier of Seattle's wonderful several times a year. Like, let's actually go there in the winter time and see what that's like, or in the dead of, when they're experiencing, their rainy season, which is quite often. And so how often do we want to be here? How expensive is it going to be? What do we do with our house during that time? And so being able to have that test plan and get really specific with it is a great way as a soft intro into retirement or whatever, that next goal is, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Another can be if there's going to be a shift in income when you are retiring.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes we're still in our highest earning years for a lot of folks when we retire, and you're not necessarily going to need all of that income when you retire, right? You have a plan in place for what you think you're going to need. So when you know what that number is that you think you want to live off of, it can be nice to test drive that. Just kind of in a sense, the opposite of what we were doing with the younger family who's trying to buy their first home. It's kind of saying, okay, if this is what the paycheck's going to be like from your financial life, let's just have you get that for a few months to see how it feels, and does it feel like the right number, and make sure that we're really set for this plan ahead.
Yeah, that's such a good point too, right? I often find the Amazon packages, they don't stop, right? So the people that we are, the person that we are, the last day we walk out that door for our final day at work, and the first day coming into retirement, we tend to have the same spending patterns. And so it could be a pretty big adjustment once we hit stop on that paycheck, and now we're living off of whatever we've saved and accumulated. And we talked about this in a previous episode of, okay, what's our number? All right, different forms of, fixed income from Social Security to pension or rental income, those types of things. But trying to work backwards to get that number first, and then figuring out, okay, well, hey, I'm actually thinking about either dropping down part-time or fully retiring in the next 6 months. Let's go through a little experiment and exercise to see, can we live off of this number a month, right?
Yeah.
And how does that feel, right? Is that pretty uncomfortable? Well, this is all good feedback to be able to have, right?
Yeah.
The other thing too, we talk about, specifically when it comes to making a big change, is oftentimes we get cold feet, and so I really like this idea of test driving, because oftentimes, and we see it a number of times from clients that come into the office, and it's like, hey, have you done the thing yet? Well, no, I'll get to it. It's next year. Well, hey, it's January now. Have we done that? Right. And there's this idea, this notion that, well, if we just talk about it enough, we'll convince ourselves that we've actually done it. Yeah. And so this idea, whatever it applies to, of just taking the next step is such a good point.
Yeah, you have to step into the arena to give it a try. You can only think about it so much and feel what you're thinking.
Right.
It doesn't really happen very well. But when you go actually try living in that town, or, taking a week off that's unstructured time home just to see what does it feel like to not have a job at home. All of a sudden you start to get a better sense for what you want it to look like. And I think that's probably the most important thing to test, in my opinion. I mean, we're talking some tactical financial things for some of these things, but when you're going to shift into retirement, you're really, if you think about it, it's like this career that you've had more often than not is something that's had a lot of meaning in your life.
Right.
And it's going to, in a sense, it may just fully go away. And so you really want to give yourself the space to think about, well, what am I retiring into? And what do I want my time and energy and talent to go toward now? Because you can only, I mean, it's like, I think of it through my own lens. I can only surf so much in a day, and I already surf every morning. Right. So like maybe when I'm retired, I can go play a round of golf too. But even then I still have half a day left. I better be doing something with my time. I don't know what it'll be when it's time for me to retire, but I'm going to have to test it and figure it out ahead of time. Because it's fascinating when you work with as many clients as we have over the years. We're all driven by some purpose to have freedom in our lives. And freedom can mean different things to different people, but I've found that it ultimately means you're optimizing your time, your money, your energy, and your talent. And when you take the shift from work, you just give up all this time, energy, and talent needs to get reallocated somewhere.
It needs
so you need to
go,
give
right?
yourself the space to figure out, what is that? Am I singing in the choir more? Am I, participating at leading the church more? Am I, becoming an usher for a baseball team? That's you, sir. I don't know. Although, are you doing that in Pittsburgh? Because
I don't know. As I tease it out, I mean, that's a podcast for another time. I don't know if I'd get behind the Dodgers. The Padres.
But like, I could totally be an usher for the Padres. I could do that. I'm there. Yeah. That sounds killer. Yeah. But like, what are you going to do? How are you going to do it? I think that's giving yourself the space to figure that out makes a ton of sense.
It really does. Test it. And, it's like what you talked about earlier too, where it's like, are we, for the context of retirement, are we retiring into something? Is there something waiting for us on that other side of the fence? Yeah. Or are we actually running from something? Right. And there's this idea that leaving a bad situation at work, hey, I'm done, don't want to be here anymore. Well, we're going to be happier on the other side. Or are there things that, it makes sense to have that test plan in place where we're leaving a big community. We're leaving a time, as you mentioned, that this was something that meant something to us. We gave 20, 30 years at a particular company, and now it's just gone. And so what do we have outside of work in terms of community? If we're relocating, right, we're just uprooting. That's really hard. Have we had dinner in that town before? Do we know where the good restaurants are? Do we have friends that we can call and be there in a heartbeat, right? If we have kids in a different city, are they going to want to hang out with us 24/7? Most likely they have their own lives to attend to. So, really like the idea of being able to have different areas outside of work, right? To be able to, look at when we have that time, energy, talent, money, like once that's gone, right? And now we have to have an avenue to fulfill it. It reminds me of this term. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, called the Ironman blues. It's really interesting. So I've never done an Ironman, full disclosure. I've ran a half marathon. That's the closest I got. So very far away. But there's this idea of you've done all this training for months and months on end. Mm-hmm. Finally have the race. You run your best race. You crush it. You cross the finish line. And now the next day, you're probably really sore, I can imagine. But you have nothing to look forward to. Like that training is gone. Yes. So people tend to have the little bit of depression of like, okay, well, what's next? Yes. And I see this a lot when it comes to goals, or in this particular instance, retirement, where we go through that awkward phase or transition of like, you mentioned the euphoria of like surfing or golfing all the time. We can only do so much of that. Now we have to figure out like, okay, well, what do we do after we had 2 months of that? And I'm kind of tired of this, or, I can
exactly. You can't do it all day, every day. Right. No. Yeah. Yeah. Such a good point. No, I hadn't heard of those blues, but I'm sure that everyone who just heard that can think of a time in their lives when they were excited about some goal happening, whether that's making a certain income or getting a certain promotion or having a success in, recreational life, like doing an Ironman or something like that. Right. And the moment it's over, the actual thing wasn't the fulfillment. It was the journey along the way that was, and it's about figuring out, what do you want that journey to be in this next phase of life?
Yeah. Such an easy question, but also a really difficult one, right? Just to be able to sit with that, just to realize
what is it? It's a simple question, not an easy question.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think hopefully let us know what you guys think. What would you test drive in your own life, in your own financial life, to see what's next for you? We'd love to hear your feedback. And if you guys want to submit a question, feel free to do so. Please, if you've been enjoying these episodes, please leave a review for us wherever you listen. We really do this to help the masses at large learn all they can about personal finance. So we want to help you guys, and let us know what you guys want to talk about, and we're happy to help. Until next time, sir.
All right. Take care.